Hey, Plain Talk listeners, do you have a question, comment, or something you want us to discuss on the show?
We want to hear from you.
Leave a voicemail or send a text to 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? I'm going to start off the show saying that I am mad at our previous guest host, Corey Mock, because he had an appointment to Governor-elect Kelly Armstrong's administration, and he didn't tell his good friend Rob about it at all. Didn't breathe a word about it, didn't leak anything. Now, maybe he didn't want to go to the new administration leaking news to the media, but he and I aren't friends. Corey, I know you're listening to this, Corey. You and I aren't friends for the rest of the day. We need to have a conversation about this. Anyway, we're back. I had such a great time off. It was nice taking a week off from Plain Talk. I thought that Corey Mock and Jessica Bell did a fantastic job sitting in. It was really good conversations. Had on Senator Dick Dever talking a little bit about, he was talking about bringing integrity back to politics. I thought some of those comments were pretty interesting. We also had Representative Scott Lauser, of course, talking about his idea for property tax reform, which actually is part of the reason why I wanted to have our guest today on, Senate Majority Leader David Hogue, with Chad Oban, of course, back in the saddle as well. And which, by the way, that was the first joke they made, too, was dunking on me for forgetting. That's why we did the whole new intro, so that I don't have to remember to introduce Chad anymore, because I forget every time.
So, Rob, I can't say if Jessica or Corey did a good job because I refused to listen because Jessica kept talking about the Bell bump. I wasn't going to be part of that. I wasn't going to be part of getting her ratings higher. I mean, that is very petty of you. Yeah. My one listenership is, the difference between winning and losing potentially.
Yeah, potentially. The Senate Majority Leader, David Hogue, coming on. And David, we're heading in. Obviously, I wanted to talk about property taxes first and foremost, because I think, obviously, beside all the things that the legislature has to do every session, funding the different agencies and everything, property taxes has to be priority number one, right? I mean, we've been having this debate for so long. One thing I thought was really interesting, I mean, it seems like we have, north of 50 now property tax bills, and I'm certainly we're going to get more. You expressed some concern about fragmentation of the debate. So maybe we can start there is, as somebody who's kind of, trying to herd the cats, as it were, in the Senate chamber, how does the winnowing process work? Like, how do you get, obviously recognizing that every lawmaker has a right to, throw their ideas in the hopper, but how does the process work where you start, getting or building a coalition around a particular approach?
Well, thanks, Rob. And by the way, I have the similar profound disappointment in Corey Mock that
I know.
you had, because I had a conversation with him and just can't express the same amount of disappointment. But
he's not getting Christmas cards from us this year. Maybe next year. This year he's off the list.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think you answered the question within your question, and it is, we start with concepts. So everybody's there's 43 bills that I've been told about. So there's 43 bills relating to both property tax relief and reform. And of course, we have that dichotomy where, somebody's idea of property tax relief is to try to pass a bill that spends money to reduce the burden on property taxpayers. Reform is, actually changing the way that political subs impose the tax, changing the amount that they can impose, changing other forms related to property taxes. And so what we've started with in the Senate, because there are a lot of bills, we've started with concepts. What are the concepts that we will be supported? And the concepts that are rising to the top are, number one, that there will be caps on political subdivisions, across the board caps. And you'll hear some opposition to it, but I think there's widespread support. I know Governor-elect Armstrong regards property tax reform, not relief, as his priority. And so I think it's going to happen this session.
Just to add to that, we had the House just reelected House Minority Leader Zach Ista on, obviously the other side of the aisle, and he was made the same blunt. Granted, this was months ago now, but had the same blunt statement. There's going to be caps.
Yeah. And to me, that will be the central concept around which all bills have to have that. I shouldn't say all bills, but all meaningful work on this will include a discussion of caps. It will include a discussion about what that cap will be, whether it'll be indexed to something like the CPI or a flat 3%. They'll include a discussion about whether the caps will be across the entire political subdivision's budget as a whole, and not just the property tax piece. And there'll be, in addition to that, there'll be, as you're aware, there's bills out there to provide more relief as well, to buy down the 60 mills for primary residence owners. There's a proposal out there to change the way we tax primary residences based on square footage as opposed to, valuations. So there's a lot of them out there, but I think from the Senate perspective, we will coalesce around some concepts, and then we will advance bills that share those concepts.
Senator Hogue, I've got sort of a two-part question. One thing, the day after the election, I got asked by several people, did Measure 4 get defeated by too big a margin? And are legislators taking that to mean they don't have to do anything on property taxes? So that's my first question. And then secondly, you said that reform is for sure going to happen. Do you think relief will for sure happen as well? Do you think it's going to be both pronged? So one, what is your caucus saying about the results of Measure 4? And then do you think it's going to be both relief and reform that get done?
I don't think Measure 4 has any impact on our willingness to do property tax reform, because we were already there. We were there before Measure 4 got its signatures. A lot of us had some discussions with the proponents of Measure 4 before they even gathered signatures, and just said, this proposal is so far out there that it doesn't have a chance in terms of, wiping out all property taxes instead of focusing on the primary residence property taxpayer. And so we were committed to that before Measure 4. We're still committed to it. The idea that it went down 64-36, failed in every county. It just doesn't have a bearing. I'm glad that it went down, but we're still committed to property tax reform for the primary residents.
I think it's important, and just because the thing is, a similar proposal to abolish property taxes went down in 2012, and we did hear the same thing from the legislature at the time, where it was, we'll fix this, we'll address this in the legislature, and it'll be better than this. So maybe speak to that a little bit. People are saying, well, yeah, you said that before.
Right.
Why should we believe you this time? And then the other thing is the distinction between reform and relief, because the relief part of it, I'm a lot less worried about than the reform. I really think we've got to dig into the structural problems here.
Right. Right. Well, and we've had these conversations for several sessions, and frankly, there are some things we've done that have not worked. And one of them is the idea that and the legislators will call it backfill, where we initially bought down mills, the school districts, but those taxes all found a way to keep going up. And so we didn't apply caps. And the idea there was sort of the mantra of the opponents of Measure 4, which is local control. Don't tell us we need to cap our budgets because you're impinging on our local control. And so we were reluctant to do that. But yet at the last biennium, we spent $1.8 billion in providing property tax relief. And we're not seeing the stabilization of the property taxes that we need to see for $1.8 billion. And one of the things that people don't realize, that of our $19.6 billion budget, state budget, which is federal dollars, state dollars, and special funds, we send back $5.5 billion to the local political subs. And yet, property taxes continue to go up. And so I think that's part of the reason why you're going to see a significant shift to strong support for caps. Going to Chad's second question, will there be relief as well? Yes. Budget's in great shape. We can afford to do more. And I think this time what will be different is, the Senate has always wanted to focus on property taxes. The House has been more focused, I think it's fair to say, on income taxes. I think this time, I think the House is in agreement with us that it needs to zero in on property taxes.
So you can hear a little bit of frustration in your voice with it, not frustration, maybe that's not the right way to put it, but I mean, when I talk to legislators, you often hear that, we've done these things, they haven't worked, political subs haven't stepped up. I suspect the Senate and the legislature is going to have the political subs coming in again and saying, don't cap us, don't cap us. What is the response to that? I mean, is it basically you've had your shot? Or what is their role in this conversation as you guys are figuring out that reform side of things? Because I mean, ideally they wouldn't need caps, right? Ideally they would have figured this out on their own. So, when we talk about local control, what is the role of cities and counties in this discussion?
Yeah, well, I've leading up to the measure, I actually asked legislative counsel, and I can share this with you because it's a public document, but I said, let's take a look at our 8 major cities and a $200,000 house over 10 years. What has happened to the tax liability? If I'm a $200,000 homeowner in Williston, Minot, Dickinson, Bismarck, Grand Forks, Fargo, Devils Lake, Jamestown, what has happened to my taxes over the past 10 years? And the answer is going to surprise you a little bit. The answer is that outside of Bismarck and Minot, your property tax bill has gone up at or near the rate of inflation over the past 10 years. So, you get
it's funny you say that, because if you actually look at the election results, although Measure 4 lost in every county, it got the most votes, or I should say the highest percentage of votes in Ward County, Minot, and Burleigh County, Bismarck.
Right. And Williams was Williams and Miller. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Bismarck and Minot are the outliers. Your taxes went up 31% above. This is aggregate over 10 years. Your taxes went up 31% above the rate of inflation over that same 10-year period of time in Bismarck and Minot. You go outside of those cities, and your property taxes on your home in those 8 or those 6 other major cities is going up at the rate of inflation. And you're saying, well, that is a surprise. I thought they were going up much faster than that. But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
we, the state of North Dakota, have been pumping in, like I said, $1.8 billion for tax relief. And from a legislative perspective, taxes shouldn't be going up at the rate of inflation.
So how does that calculation account for valuations? Because you have a fixed valuation, $200,000 over time. But I think one of the major frustrations that a lot of people have, and somebody finally described it to me, it's a tax on an unrealized gain, where if they come along and they say, well, your home's worth $50,000 more, well, whatever they do with mills, I'm getting a tax increase because, and based on value that I don't realize unless I sell my home. So how does your calculation, I wonder how valuations play into that, because I think that's a
valuation.
Okay.
We track valuations. The valuations went up, as you'd expect, at different rates in different cities. But bottom line, what we tracked is your tax liability, because that's what people care about. That's what they care about. If your mills stay the same and your valuation stays the same, you don't care. If your valuation goes up but your mills come down, you still don't care. All you care about is how much is your tax liability. But we did track valuations, and valuations, they went up substantially at the rate of inflation. And so the outliers, again, were the two, the capital city and the magic city. In Dickinson, your tax liability on that 200,000 was well below the rate of inflation. So, I mean, the cities are all over the place.
So shifting gears slightly, in the North Dakota Monitor this morning, there's a story about new legislative staff. I think that 3 new staff have already been hired. But then the headline also referenced 50 new legislative staff by 2029. Can you put that a little bit into context? I mean, that seems like a huge number to me. Like, how many legislative staff, full-time staff are there now, and why the need beyond? I mean, is the thought that you've got veteran legislators leaving and that experience means it has to be replaced by staff? And are you concerned about, does this lead to staff running the show up at the Capitol?
Yeah, great question. And I'm glad you asked it, because I need to get with the Monitor, because they've reported on that now twice, Chad, and they've missed the significant part of that story, which is we are going to take positions that lie within the executive branch and bring them into the legislative branch. So we're not talking about 50 or 40 new positions. We're talking about people that are within the executive branch that are asked to evaluate the programs that we create and tell us whether those programs are effective or not. So let's go back to 2023. We spent $60 million on new dollars for childcare. And I would like to know, okay, the reason we spend $60 million is to get more people into the workforce. And we'd like to lower the cost of childcare. And we presume that will happen if we inject state dollars. We presume we'll get more people into the workforce if more people can afford daycare. Is that happening? Is that policy working? Well, we don't want to ask members of the executive branch whether the policy that we're giving them money to do is working. We want the people that are working for us to tell us whether the programs that we create are working. The same thing with the primary residence tax credit. I want to be able to talk to those people and say, what do we need to do to make this program easier? The homestead tax credit. I call it, we're going to the Montana model, which is their staff is, they're relatively the same. They're a citizen legislature, meet once every 2 years, same population. They have 150 people in their legislative council, compared to ours is about 50. Why is that? Is it because they have a bigger agency? No, is because the people that evaluate the effectiveness of the programs they create are working for them and not for the executive branch.
So to put a finer point on that, so for example, if there's somebody in the tax department right now who's analyzing different tax programs, that FTE would be moved to Ledger Council or OMB or Human Services or wherever. So it's okay.
You can see where that's problematic though, because if you fund a program at a state agency, and then that state agency has an employee that's responsible for evaluating the success of that program, there's some potential for bias there, where they're going to say, "Well, of course, the program that we asked for is working well."
That's why I call it a transition to the Montana model, where the people that are measuring the performance of the programs are working for the people who create the programs.
And so so there's a connection made to term limits as the reason for this. It seems like the explanation you just made, it should be done regardless of term limit, to make the legislature better.
Well, there's a term limits part of it as well. And, I think everybody agrees when you have term limits, you are informally shifting the balance of power away from the legislative branch, the policymaking branch, to the executive branch and to the lobbyists. So that's a component of that as well. But what I don't think, you alluded to the monitor, what they haven't picked up on is we're trying to bring program evaluation into the people, into the branch of government that creates it.
It basically,
That's the Montana model. That's what every other state does. But we've been this skeletal crew we have lawyers that draft the bills. We have budget people that count the money, but we don't have policy people and we don't have performance evaluators.
I perceive it as the legislature sort of sharpening its oversight role, because that's one role that the legislature has. Is obviously you write the budgets, you write the laws, but then there's also that, well, did what we do work? And the legislature needs an independent workforce that can do that research and not rely on the executive branch necessarily to do it. That just makes, to Chad's point, yeah, I mean, whatever's happening with term limits, that's something we should be doing. What about, we just came through an election. Obviously, a lot of times that shakes up the personnel down in Bismarck. I don't perceive a lot of changes, though, in the dynamics in Bismarck. Our friends, the Democrats, really didn't, have a lot of change in terms of I think they lost a seat in one chamber, gained a seat in the other. Even within the Republican Party, I don't, that massive supermajority, as they call it. I don't perceive a lot of changes. The dynamics there kind of seems like we have the same leadership teams basically in place. I just don't perceive that there's going to be a lot different in terms of, I guess, philosophy or approach. It's the same people. It's kind of a status quo election.
I would agree with that assessment. I mean, there wasn't a lot of change. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean,
there is one change. I mean, Kelly Armstrong is the new governor. I think that's a pretty significant change. And with him, I mean, obviously Governor Burgum had some issues getting along with legislators and that kind of thing. What advice would you give to Kelly to sort of, I mean, he's one of you, so that helps. But what advice would you give him in terms of building those olive branches moving forward?
Well, I think you got to remember two things. There's always going to be a natural tendency between, or I shouldn't say a tendency, but there's always going to be a healthy arm's length dealings between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and that just goes with our system of government. But with regard to Kelly in particular, I mean, I feel like he's been in legislative circles for a long enough time that I don't think he needs an olive branch. I mean, I think he's got very good relations, and I don't know. I think Governor Burgum had good relations as well. There are some things he did that the legislative branch didn't appreciate. But I mean, I have found him to be very engaging, wanting to partner on everything. So I don't know if olive branch is the right term for Governor Burgum, and I don't think Governor Armstrong elect will have difficulty in getting along and engaging with the legislature.
My perception of Governor Burgum is that there were a lot of times there was a gap between his public demeanor at times and maybe the private demeanor when he's in a room with you or other state leaders working, that there was a difference. Because sometimes I would read like a press release, or I would listen to him speaking, at a press conference, or read like for instance a veto message, and he'd have some language in there where I'm like, whew, that was a zinger. It's some tough language. And what a lot of people tell me is like, but he didn't talk that way behind the scenes. So I felt like sometimes there was a performative angle to what Governor Burgum was doing, where he was getting some zingers in that maybe were just kind of for the crowd. And I don't perceive that. I don't perceive that same thing with Kelly. I mean, when I talked to Kelly privately, I interviewed Kelly publicly. He's the same guy. We have the same conversations, whether it's on air or off air. That to me it seems like it's going to be a very distinct, maybe a subtle difference, but a distinct difference between the two leadership styles.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, I think you've reported on a couple of Governor Burgum's, after the special session where we didn't provide the income tax relief that he was looking for. That message, yeah, I think you reported on that, was pretty shrill.
Pretty
tough.
Yeah. He said, but I mean, it was like, whoa.
Yeah, you know what? 2 weeks later, we visited, and wasn't. It just goes with the territory, I don't worry about that stuff. I mean, I just like to be able to win without bragging and lose without crying, and just go on to the next issue.
Yeah.
So.
Do we have one other issue before
Just so everyone knows what we were talking about, I just looked up the headline from October. Yeah, it's no book. I just looked up the headline for Governor Burgum's press release, October 2023. It says Senate squanders opportunity to save taxpayers $46 million a year by killing tax relief bills. So it's like, woo, smoking.
So, one of the other things that Rob has reported on, and I think will be an issue this session, is overcrowding of prisons. What kind of, what do you think is going to happen there? I mean, are we looking at sort of reform? I mean, I know the Attorney General is pushing mandatory minimums and that type of thing. How do you think that plays out this session? It feels like it's going to be a conflict. I mean, it can sort of feel it coming.
Another great question. That's on the top of my list because, I've been on appropriations. I've done the Department of Corrections budget, so I know, they have a process for prioritizing and sort of telling the counties that they're not in a position to take, in the district courts, that they're not in a position to always take what they're being offered. But I think we've got to get in right away at the beginning of the session and figure out how big of a crisis this is. Because to me, the answer is not, okay, these people, if they're violent offenders, if they're dangerous, the answer is not for them to be, released and on probation. And so my question is, what sort of contracting capacity does Department of Correction have with other institutions to take these folks? Because that might have to be the short-term solution. And I genuinely want to find out how much pressure is being put on both the judicial system and the Department of Corrections and the county jails to sort of to release people who should not be released. And so I don't want the answer to be, gosh, we just don't have any more available cells, so I guess this person has to be on some sort of heightened supervised release. To me, that's not a good answer.
Sort of ancillary to that, another story that I was reporting on was a couple, and it was based on a couple of anecdotes, but when I'm talking to, the criminal defense bar and judges and a lot of people, it's but it was a situation out of, Judge Cherie Clark's courtroom in Fargo, Judge Stacy Lauser's courtroom here in Minot, where, they had a couple of instances where they couldn't even get a person to trial. Or I shouldn't say that. I think in Judge Clark's, it was a question of they couldn't get to sentencing because the state of North Dakota didn't have the capacity to provide mental health services to make these people competent to proceed in the court proceedings. And so that's another thing. I know we're down the road towards a new state hospital in Jamestown, but one of the things that people are saying is, is building a new facility in Jamestown really the solution? Should we be looking at I can speak to that. Like, we also have a mental health shortage. It's impacting the criminal justice system, among other facets of our society. I know we're down the road a ways on a new state hospital, but I mean, is that enough, or is that the right road? I mean, where should we be going with this?
Well, I wish somebody would give us the answers. The new state hospital has got, the design it's over designed. It costs too much. So that's something we're going to have to take a hard look at this session. But Senator Mathern from Fargo has been making the argument for at least 2 sessions that
I should say that Senator Mather prompted that question because he's been emailing me his information, and I actually think I think he makes a pretty compelling argument, honestly.
Yeah, well, he's been a staunch advocate for decentralizing the delivery of mental health care services in the state of North Dakota, and the reason is he just feels this centralized state hospital is antiquated to the way we provide those services. We don't do it that way anymore. And in part, I agree with him, but where the rub is the cost, of course. And so you start creating all these separate facilities around the state, and it gets to be quite costly. But in terms of the state hospital, I mean, we need to have a better understanding of the scope of that project, and I don't feel like we have that right now. So going into the session, that's another thing, like prison lack of capacity that we're going to look at early on in the session to figure out if we're still on the right path.
Well, Senator Hogue, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Senator.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
All right, so, Chad, I will tell you, I had a wonderful vacation. By the way, we just finished up with Senate Majority Leader David Hogue. But now I want to talk about my vacation a little bit. We actually had a great time. And the thing is, it's probably not what a lot of people would think of as a vacation, because we flew down to Arizona. We drove a car I bought back. We kind of had to have some long days in the car. But I love driving around this country. I think it's great. We probably didn't drive more than about 200-300 miles on 4-lane roads the whole way, which my wife didn't appreciate as much as I did. But I really love the back roads. I love seeing weird things that I've never seen before. I love the scenery, the transition going from the desert into the mountains, into the plains.
And you went Arizona and up? Like
Arizona, up through Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota.
Yeah. Last summer we went down to Salt Lake City, Park City, Utah, and drove and went through Montana and went through like the park and whatever. It's awesome. I love road tripping. I just absolutely love it. So while you were having this beautiful vacation last week, I want you to know that I was at a meeting in Cincinnati, Ohio last week.
I knew this. You were texting me complaining about it.
Yes. But I will tell you, I did come back and I went on vacation on Sunday, just got back this morning.
Yeah.
I went to South Bend, Indiana, and watched the University of North Dakota play basketball against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
Is that the only reason you went to South Bend?
So it's the only reason I went to South. Some friends were going and also down for the game. And like we got the invitation from some friends, like, when am I going to go to South Bend, Indiana and see the campus of Notre Dame? So spent a couple days on campus. It's amazing. It was super fun.
You would never think of like South Bend, Indiana, but like we went down to Omaha randomly. Actually, what happened was my kids got Justin Bieber tickets. This was years ago for Christmas, and we had to go down. We had to go down. One kid got it. But we had to. My daughter just came in and started shouting at me while I'm recording.
Fact checking you.
She's checking me in real time. But we drove down. Omaha was great. First of all, it was a great drive down. Omaha's a cool town, man. We went downtown. We had great food. We went to the zoo. They have a wonderful zoo. This is great.
Oh, we went to the Omaha Zoo on a road trip to Kansas City, and it was 187 degrees that day, but it was a fantastic zoo. I will say South Bend off campus, I don't know if it's a place I'd hang out a lot, but on campus was great. Again, like you said, ate great food, hung out with good people. There's some real like cool places in the Midwest that people probably look there. The coast look down on a little bit, but they're great places.
They really are. They really are. So I had a lot of fun. I am legitimately upset with Corey Mock that he didn't leak this to me.
Yeah, I got a little different take on this than you and Senator Hogue. I just want to say congratulations, Corey Mock, on your appointment. This isn't about Rob. This isn't about Senator Hogue. Congratulations, Corey.
I'll say it too. And I actually wrote a very nice column. I think he's a great pick. I think he's a super competent guy. Even though ideologically he and I are at loggerheads, he was somebody that you could talk to in the legislature. He was an honest dealer. And I really like the symbolism of a Republican governor picking a Democrat, given the times that we're living in. I feel, I don't know. Was that what was driving Kelly's thinking? I think he'd probably tell us it was, I'm just picking the right guy for the job. And I agree with that. I think that's right. But I feel like there's something meaningful in picking a Democrat to serve in his administration. These times we're living in.
Yeah. And I think, Corey Mock, no matter what party, was a really, really good legislator and understood the budget better than anyone on either side. And so he's going to understand this process. He's got good relationships with the members of both parties in the legislature. I think if you're Kelly Armstrong, what you want now is for your cabinet officials never to be in the news ever again after you appoint them, right? I mean, that's sort of the goal. But yeah, congrats to Corey. I'm just worried that we've lost a guest host now.
I don't know if he can guest host now. I guess we'll find out. We'll have to lobby Kelly to to let his cabinet members guest host the podcast. No, I'm really happy, and I was teasing Corey completely. But that's very interesting. I thought Senator Hogue's comments. I'm feeling cautiously optimistic that we're going to get something real on property taxes out of this legislative session.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind, and maybe that's a mistake in this day and age to be so confident. There is going to be relief. There's going to be some sort of buy down. He was very clear it'd be going to primary residents and not every property taxpayer. I thought that was interesting, that it won't necessarily go to corporations or out of state sort of folks, the primary resident. And then the reform piece. There is going to be a cap. I think the question is going to come down is the cap, like he said, CPI or something like that. But I also think this concept of rollover, right? I mean, if a local political sub goes up 2% one year, will they get 4% the next year? I think there's some details, but I think there's going to be reform and relief.
I think so. I'm less concerned about the relief because I think part of it's just I've been so frustrated that that's all we've been doing in the past, where it's just we just keep moving more and more local spending into the state budget without doing anything to constrain the problem, or doing I shouldn't say not doing anything, doing very little to constrain, or very little that's been effective in constraining the problem at the local level. So.
And I will say again that if you don't have relief in the short term while you're waiting for reform to kick in, you're going to continue to have angry property taxpayers. So I think you have to have this session some sort of relief.
That makes sense. You were saying, I was very impressed that the episode prior to this one was Scott Lauser. I was very impressed with him presenting his idea. He had been on the podcast with you and I previously, and it talked about an earlier iteration of this idea,
Yeah, that included a school choice piece,
which you didn't like so much. But the thing I really like about, and this is what I think what makes Scott Lauser an excellent lawmaker, is he's not like locked into it. It's not like I've written it in stone. This is the only way it can be. He's basically saying, listen, here's a framework. Help me fill this in. Completely open. You were telling me off air, you think that his plan is the model.
It feels like that to me. Because his has a reform, it has the caps, and it has the relief part with the buying down the K through 12 mills. It feels like it's going to be some version of that. The reform, because his has both. And so I think that's sort of the model. I don't think the Koppelman, and I think you said in your column, the idea of paying for square footage or that kind of thing, maybe from a policy perspective, it might have legs. He just challenged the majority leader.
Right.
There's no property tax reform that's getting through with Ben Koppelman's name on it.
No. No, and he represents a faction of, listen, this shouldn't matter in policy debates, but it does. And he also represents a faction, sort of the Brandon Pritchard faction that, they had a tough primary. They're if you look at that vote, I forget, it was 50 something to 30 something, I think. I'm forgetting the exact numbers, but it tells me that the quote unquote Bastiat it's about the same size as it was previously. And I just don't think that they're going to have a lot of clout in Bismarck this time around. We'll find out. But I do find that intriguing, because I do think we've got to get valuations out of the mix. And I think caps get valuations out, in that it's a cap. And so whatever the reason is, the bill can't go over a certain amount, whether it's because valuations went up or mills went up. But I do think the valuations got to get out of it, because it's not just the spending. It's also valuations keep climbing. Therefore, people are just getting automatic increases in their taxes, and it's on unrealized gains. And that's not fair.
And I think that, what exactly do the caps look like? Are they a cap on the total budget? Are they a cap on an individual's property taxes going up? I think those things will be really, really important. And again, I think Senator Hogue's concern about there being 44 bills or whatever that is, and that people are going to sort of go into their own camps and sort of get behind their own bills. I think that he and LaFleur are doing a pretty good job of trying to sort of bring people together on concepts and that kind of thing. That I don't think we're going to have that. I don't think we're going to have the, let's do income taxes versus the let's do property taxes, House versus Senate fight. It seems to me both chambers are pretty set that something needs to be done on property taxes. Also, I appreciate the fact that, he didn't care how much Measure 4 got defeated by, because that he said they're doing something before Measure 4 was even done. So you said cautiously optimistic. I'm just optimistic. I think it's going to get done.
I hope you're right. And I think you probably are. Because I think we're headed. We seem to be on the right trajectory here, and there seems to be a seriousness about it this time. Probably the only people who are still clinging are frankly some local government interests. Certainly not all, but there are some that I think maybe thinking that they can get through this legislative session with some degree of the status quo still intact. And I hope that they're wrong, and I hope that they're defeated, because we have got to do something. The status quo cannot stand on this.
Well, and I also think if you're Kelly Armstrong, you've got a lot of power here, right? I mean, you can say, I'm not signing any other bill until you send me significant property tax relief. I'm not going to sign off on funding on this or funding on this or funding on this. Let's get property tax done first.
I don't think, Kelly, somebody was telling me this, and that they would really like to see Kelly Armstrong. I was talking to somebody, and they said, yeah, he seems like he'll be another, hand on the tiller, steady hand on the tiller. And I'm like, I don't think we need that right now. I would like to see Kelly Armstrong spend some of this political capital he's got, because he's got a lot to spend.
He's got a lot, and right now he has more political capital than he's ever going to have again.
So let's get started. Let's do some bold things. And I don't know what those are, and I don't, other than what he's talked about publicly, but let's get a little weird. Let's try some, because it seems like we've been doing, whether so many of the problems that we have, chronic workforce shortages, childcare shortages, the
behavioral mental health,
property tax, behavioral mental health, all these things. It seems like we've been doing variations of the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
So, Rob, do you agree that it feels like this correction behavioral health thing is going to be a real conflict this coming up session? It just feels like that is something where there's really divergent views on on how you handle corrections, the giving people training and counseling versus just locking them up.
I think when you have so many things that people feel very strongly about, because what you mentioned, we have an attorney general right now who is very much a put him in prison. He would probably Drew Wrigley would probably dispute that, would not like that characterization. But I'm trying to think of maybe a fairer way to say it. But I mean, to your point, he's talking about mandatory minimums. I mean, he's talking about keeping more people in. Well, that means we either have to build more capacity then, or we have to let some other people out.
And I didn't think Kelly Armstrong is there. I mean, I think Kelly's been a reform kind of guy in the past. I think
Well, he's a former criminal defense attorney, and I think that's where his heart is.
right.
So I guess it's a question. But the thing is, you have that attitude running into a lot of parochialism. The Senate Majority Leader didn't mention it, but one of the reasons why the Jamestown Hospital is in Jamestown is to satisfy Jamestown area interests, much in the same way that a lot of our institutions were sort of scattered across the state. It was vote buying. And
Right.
so there's some parochial, like we had a big debate about the women's prison over in New England, which is, it is a terrible facility. It's a former like Catholic school. It is a bad facility, and it's not good for the inmates to be there. It's very hard for family and friends to visit because it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's hard to get services in, so like dentists or mental health care. But Governor Burgum began the legislative session, wanted to shut it down, and he lost. What won the day was parochialism, because you have Jamestown interests saying don't break up the state hospital, because if you break up the state hospital, then I'm going to vote to break up the institution that's in your backyard. Maybe it's a university or whatever it is, veterans home, who knows? I mean, it locks so much of the status quo in place, and it makes reform impossible.
And it's a terrible way to do government.
It really is.
Terrible way to do government. I mean, you're right. I mean, like Tim Mather was right. We're against centralizing things and services. We want to be able to provide services close to people's homes.
Although, and I don't think Senator Hogue was making a parochial argument. His argument was there's cost in doing it that. And by the way, one of the costs is you have to hire more workforce. And that's one, if you talk to the mental health people, one of the problems is even if you build us new facilities, who are we going to hire to work there?
Right.
It's
we just talked about all the different issues that are coming up this session. We didn't talk about education. We didn't talk about a lot of different things. It all comes down to workforce. And if we don't do something to figure out workforce, we can't solve behavioral and mental health. We can't solve correction. We can't solve school issues. We need more workers in North Dakota.
And listen, I understand Chad and I are saying this, and then you ask us, what do we do? And I don't think either of us has a very good answer on deck.
Yeah, I don't think we'd be sitting in this chair if we could solve the workforce problem for the state of North Dakota.
Right, exactly. We would be getting paid a lot of money as a consultant or something to solve the problem. But I don't have the answer either. I will say that doing stuff like Find the Good Life, well, I feel like the motivations were commendable, and I feel like they've done it's just not working. A lot of that kind of stuff isn't working. And I feel like there's some opportunities that are very unique to this moment. We're seeing sort of a revolution in the modern workplace where people don't need to be in centralized locations. They can sort of spread out. North Dakota, for a certain type of person, North Dakota is a great place to live. Not for everybody, but a lot of people enjoy the outdoors. They enjoy hunting. Some of these small towns have a lot to offer. Are there things we can do to bring them in and then have them bring families with who can then fill some of these other jobs that we have? There's a lot of opportunities right now.
That's exactly right. We're not to the point where a couple moving to North Dakota has to find two jobs, right? You can often do one remote job wherever you're coming from and then have your spouse who's a nurse come and work in Fargo or Bismarck and whatever. I think there is a lot more flexibility. I'm with you. I think those ads, I mean, while they're nice and they make North Dakota feel good, I would be very interested if there's a way to Senator Hogue's points earlier about analyzing programs and appropriations. I don't think a lot of North Dakota or people are moving to North Dakota because we're an advocacy.
Well, like that Find the Good Life program. I mean, I think we have some numbers, and it's Not very many. I mean, it's like handful of people. I mean, so not, and again, I'm not running down the people who are doing it. I think it's just an idea that's not working. I'm not like blaming or pointing the finger or somebody's bad. They tried it. It didn't work. It just means we have to try something else or build on top of it. We got to do something, but we got to get more people here. We've got to be innovative. And that's really, I mean, I have some tolerance with Kelly when it comes to trying some things and letting them fail. But let's try some different things. Maybe they will fail. Maybe they'll be a roaring success. I don't know what.
I thought the other thing that Senator Hogue said that was interesting is he was sort of defending the relationship between Burgum and the legislature. And I think that relationship did evolve, but there's no doubt at the beginning, it was not a good relationship after he'd beaten Stenjum and talked about the good old boys or whatever. So I think, unlike Burgum, Kelly's going to come in here with the most legislative relationships that it reminds me of Jack Dalrymple. I mean, Jack Dalrymple could walk down the hall and he knew the appropriations process better than any legislator. Kelly understands criminal justice and so many things better than any legislature. I think this is a real opportunity in January if they focus on the right things, because we're still going to have to deal with these sort of cultural issues and that sort of garbage again. I mean, I've heard that Casper's bringing in other parental bill of rights and book bans and, bathroom bills and all that kind of.
Well, we're seeing it already at the national level. I mean, we're on the brink of World War III. Russia's rattling the nuclear, saber. We're still grappling with inflation. There's still a lot of problems that are facing our country. But what has convulsed Congress right now is whether or not we're going to appoint a man who was once being investigated by the Department of Justice for sex trafficking to lead the Department of Justice, and also that the newly elected trans member of the House of Representatives, we got to make sure she doesn't use the wrong bathroom.
Yeah.
Which is just not, I actually thought and today while we were recording, I just saw a press release where Speaker Johnson just issued a rule change where she can't use the female bathroom or something like that. And the thing is, I actually thought when he was initially, I saw a thing where he was initially asked about it at a press conference, and I actually liked his answer. He says, listen, everybody has a right, everybody who's elected to the House of Representatives has a right to be here. We're going to do our best to accommodate everybody. And I'm not going to entertain a silly fight about that. And I thought, wow, okay, great. Like maybe it's a bathroom. Let's just figure out, accommodate everybody and move on and do the public's work. But now, the media got a hold of it and now there's grandstanding going on and I'm just tired.
So the congresswoman from Delaware isn't allowed to use a bathroom? So is she being directed to use the male bathroom?
I guess. I all I have is a breaking news alert here, so I'm not.
This is also stupid. I mean, honestly, we're talking about bathrooms. We're talking about where people urinate.
Yeah.
That's where Congress is at. But you mentioned Matt Gaetz. I mean, and you had a good column up about sort of Kevin Kramer. And, I think as you're seeing the Matt Gaetz, the Tulsi Gabbard, the defense secretary, I mean, all these people sort of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Republicans, Dr. Oz, the Republican Senate isn't going to be able to vote no on all of these people, right? So there's just this complete flooding of the zone that there's going to be some really, really unqualified people who, I mean, the former CEO of WWF Wrestling is about to be the Secretary of Education. She's not even controversial compared to some of these other people, right?
I think that's, a lot. Some people were kind of, is Matt Gaetz a tactic? And it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, Gaetz seems to think he's getting in. He resigned from the House, although that might have been to head off the ethics report that was coming out. But the thing is I mean, Trump will knife anybody. I mean, even his most loyal, Trump cares about Trump. And so he'll throw anybody under the bus. He's happy to throw Matt Gaetz under the bus if it gives some cover to RFK Jr. or some of the other appointments that he wants in. Maybe he knows he's not going to get Gaetz. But
did John Hoven and Kevin Kramer vote for every nominee who gets to the floor for a vote?
I don't know. And the question to me is how many of them are actually going to get to the floor of the ones that are nominated now.
I think if Matt Gaetz gets to the floor, Kramer and Hoven will vote yes on him. I think they will vote yes for every Trump nominee who gets
That makes to the floor. Yeah.
That makes it to the floor.
I think that if they, I think they may express all sorts. I mean, I think they may try to act to stop it from getting to the floor.
Right.
But I think if it comes down, they're not going to want Trump tweeting about him.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what it is right now. Is there's no room for bucking Trump. When the rubber hits the road, there's no room for bucking Trump and the Republican Party right now. I don't think that's a healthy thing. But
yeah, well, and you've got the Department of Defense guy who, paid off somebody for sexual harassment a few years ago, barely even talking about that because Matt Gaetz has allegedly had sex with minors while people are and paying them to do it, right?
And you can't really blame people for focusing on that because
yeah. Well, and not to mention Tulsi Gabbard, former Democrat Congresswoman, I think is a Russian asset. Or a lot of people have said she's a Russian asset. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., again, a Democrat who's a crazy person who doesn't believe in vaccines and fluoride in water and all these different things. I mean, it's like Trump and the MAGA crowd has taken the craziest Democrats and said, come on over here.
It's the horseshoe theory where you get far enough out on the fringe, they get pretty close to each other. And the weird thing to me, and I mean, the two things that drive me nuts about this situation. One is it is hard to debate against the MAGA movement when it's not even consistent internally, which Donald Trump during COVID, I mean, the Trump administration facilitated the COVID-19 vaccines. I actually think it was something they did a pretty good job on. I will give them credit for that. But now you are going to put at the head of the Department of Health and Human Services the most notorious anti-vaxxer in the country.
Right.
These things are in tension with one another. So I mean, it's hard to debate against that. And then the other thing is I have always respected Kevin Kramer's faith. His faith is not my faith, but I've always respected it. I think he's sincere about it. And I think it is really important in his life. And I think it guides him. And the thing that I really struggle with, that I was writing about in the column, is when he does things and kind of set that aside and say, well, I'm going to vote for somebody who is clearly fails the standards for character that I set for myself and that my faith calls me to, but I'm going to vote for him anyway. And maybe he won't. I mean, we don't know how he's going to, I don't want to suggest that Kevin Kramer is going to vote in a way he hasn't voted on it yet. And I have liked his comments so far, or at least he's been skeptical. I mean, it's encouraging, but I'm not optimistic. But let's say he does vote for him. And certainly Kevin Kramer supported Donald Trump and voted for Donald Trump, who has a lot of the same problems Matt Gaetz does, if we're being honest. But what drives me nuts is when this happens, like, you can just sort of casually set aside your faith when it's expedient to you politically. What you're doing is you're asking me to take your faith more seriously than you do.
Yeah.
And whether it's Kevin Kramer, whether it's Speaker Johnson, whether it's a lot of the other people who are all faith and family and God and the rest of this, except we're going to support these cretins who do things that are morally repugnant. I don't know. Why should I take your faith more seriously than you do? That's the question I guess I would like them to answer.
And I'm guessing they would not give the same amount of grace to a Democrat nominee who is accused of raping underage girls.
Well, in fact, they don't. I mean, they were still talking about Bill Clinton and not unjustifiably. Democrats I remember when Democrats were being very apologist for Bill Clinton even Bill Clinton was on the campaign trail for Kamala Harris. I mean, Bill Clinton should have been retired a long time ago. So there's some hypocrisy on the left about it, and I understand that, and I'm not, but I am also tired of Republicans justifying their behavior by saying, well, it's okay if we do it because the Democrats do it.
Because 30 years ago, the Democrats did it. Right. I mean, right. I mean, and I also yes, Bill Clinton should have been off the campaign trail a long time ago. What he did was absolutely disgusting. He got impeached. Right. I mean, he paid some price for it. Matt Gaetz gets
impeached, but not convicted. Yeah. Well, but
it's mainly promotion after raping underage people. I mean, it's crazy. Here's the other thing that we haven't mentioned the fact that Burgum is part of the cabinet. Will likely be. I suspect he will get a ton of votes. I mean, I think there'll be Democrats, maybe environmentalists type will vote against them.
I
But
mean, listen, as utterly disappointed, and I am, the degree to which Doug Burgum, a man who I had and still to some degree have a great deal of respect for, turned himself into a Trump toady. I will never forget it. It turns my stomach. That being said, he is a very competent guy. He's well qualified to be the Department of Interior. He should absolutely be confirmed. And I say that as generally, I think if the person who wins the national election should generally get to surround themselves with the people they want, barring
if they're within the normal guardrails,
barring them being like grossly something like Matt Gaetz, who is not only morally repugnant but grossly unqualified for the position. Obviously, several of Trump's nominees fit that criteria. I'm not saying the Senate has to give carte blanche, but Burgum is so far over the hurdle. Of course, he should be confirmed.
So, but let's imagine that first day on January 20th or 21st when Trump gets his cabinet together and they're sitting around the table and there's Doug Burgum with Robert Kennedy Jr. on one side of him, Matt Gaetz on the other side of him, Tulsi Gabbard across I mean, that's where Doug Burgum wants to be. Those are the people he wants to be associated with.
I mean, I wrote about that. I'm trying to imagine. I'm trying to imagine the cabinet room, or like he's that scene from the movie, right, where the president's sitting there and all their advisors are around the big table. And I'm thinking, I was imagining that. And there's Doug Burgum, and you have RFK Jr. over ranting about fluoride in water, and you have Tulsi Gabbard reading Russian state media, and you have Matt Gaetz showing pictures of his latest sexual conquests, and Doug Burgum is sitting there. And I guess I just don't understand. Why do you want to be there?
And then you got Marco Rubio and Doug Burgum in a corner. Like, what is going on?
Marco Rubio, another one who is, I mean, whatever you think of his politics, he's qualified to be the Secretary of State. He should be 100% be confirmed. He's a good pick as far as I'm concerned.
Again, in the normal guardrails of American politics.
Right. But it is frustrating to me. It is so frustrating to me when I see people who I think Kevin Cramer is a good, again, setting aside differences over policy, he's a well-qualified, and I think he represents North Dakota well. He's hardworking. He's very open with his constituents. And let's be honest, given the vote totals for him, North Dakotans are happy with the job he's doing. So, I mean, I think, I get so disappointed in these people that I know on a personal level and I know on a professional level, and I look at the sort of things that they're supporting, and I just can't get over it. Like, I can't, it's wrong. It's wrong, and I don't understand why you don't see that.
So I, like you, think to the winner goes the spoils, right? I mean, a president gets to appoint who they want to their position. The governor gets to appoint who they want within this normal sort of spectrum of American politics. The problem is it seems like every one of his choices, not everyone, but I mean, think about Doug Burgum literally followed the DOD guy who's a Fox News commentator, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Matt Gaetz. Those are the three that led up to Doug Burgum. So for every one Doug Burgum, there's three choices. And I'm like, what is happening here? I can personally think of hundreds of people I know personally who would be better than these people.
It's remarkable how many are just because a lot of times the normal presidential administration comes in, you're seeing people get elevated that the public doesn't know that well. Right. I mean, here it's like Donald Trump's picking people off TV. In a lot of ways.
Many of them are like
Pete Hegseth's a Fox News contributor. Dr. Oz was an Oprah creation and had his own TV show. Linda McMahon,
and Duffy from the Real World.
For somebody from the Real World. Linda McMahon, professional wrestling. I mean, my goodness. And by the way, there's a big scandal going on in professional wrestling about ring boys being pedophiles and everything. And I think of all the conspiracy theories, like the QAnon stuff and their secret pedophile rings and everything. And I'm looking, Matt Gaetz.
Yep.
There's people who have testified under oath that he had sex with a 17-year-old girl at a party.
Have you watched the Vince McMahon documentary on Netflix?
I have. I think everybody should watch it because I think people maybe don't understand how involved Donald Trump personally was in WWE and the degree to which Donald Trump has taken the performance art. It's called kayfabe, the performance art that is behind professional wrestling, and brought it into politics. And professional wrestling, too, is a bigger part of American culture that I think it gets credit for. It's fascinating. Vince McMahon's a disgusting figure, but
So disgusting.
but
So disgusting.
but also fascinating. So it's a very well done documentary. It's very, very good, and it's illuminating not just about this consequential figure in American culture, Vince McMahon, but also you look downstream from it. Politics is downstream from culture, always has been.
Yep.
So Trumpism is downstream from the culture of professional wrestling. You should watch this documentary. It's called Mr. McMahon, which, by the way, is also the name of the heel character that Vince McMahon played. And I think Donald Trump does something different. I think the Trump that's out on the campaign trail, that's at the rallies and everything, that is a character. And in a lot of ways, I don't think it's that different from who Trump is, but it's an amplified version of it that's done for effect.
Yeah, I watching that documentary and seeing sort of the Trump relationship to WWE and WWF, and sort of seeing, well, that's part of his base, right? I mean, that's part of his base now. And now the fact that he's going to UFC fights and being really prominent in this is part of his base.
Although, by the way, you know, JD Vance apparently wasn't invited to like the UFC fights and stuff. Like he's got RFK Jr. and everybody else there, and not Vance. Which I think is kind of funny.
Well, how long until Trump gets sick of Elon Musk, by the way? 6 months?
You got to wonder how two egos that large.
It doesn't work for very long. Doesn't work very
Especially when you start hearing that like Musk was pushing back on some of his appointments. Trump's only going to take so much of that.
Yeah.
And especially when he's never going to run another re-election campaign. Well, not a legal one. So he doesn't really, I mean, it's going to be Trump's calculation of how long he needs Musk. He'll knife him too.
And I saw that DeSantis is contemplating appointing Laura Trump to the Senate seat once Marco is gone.
Why not? I mean, we once fought a revolution to get her away from hereditary offices, but sure.
Yeah, but we had 87 straight elections where there was a Clinton or a Bush in them. So it's not just the Trumps.
Yeah. Well, the Kennedys too. I mean,
Yeah.
That's fair. All right, we're going to put a pin in it there. As Corey, I do not realize how often I say put a pin in it until Corey Mock called me out for it in one of the shows. But I do. At the end of every show, I go, let's put a pin in it there.
So again, I'm not kidding that I didn't listen to either show because not wanting to give them a listener. But did they just spend the whole time making fun of you?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much. And didn't make fun of that much of you. No, they didn't. They did a great job. I'm very thankful for them both to sitting in for us. Coming up on Friday, we are going to have Adam Willis. You may recognize him. He was a forum reporter for a while. He's now a freelance reporter. Wrote a story about the carbon capture debate, Summit Carbon Solutions, and that whole thing. He wrote it as a freelance reporter for Bloomberg. So he asked to come on the show and talk about it a little bit. He's going to be on Friday. And I spent my vacation working. So we actually are booked ahead coming up on the 27th. I thought we had something.
We have Sean Clary.
Sean Clary coming up on the 27th as well. And then I don't know if we're going to be doing a Friday Plain Talk right after Thanksgiving. I don't know. Chad and I need to probably talk about that off air.
We probably deserve a break. I mean, by that point, we will have done 3 shows with 3 breaks in a row.
Yeah. Need another vacation.
Who's the guy going on vacation all the time?
It's the day after Thanksgiving. I'm going to be I'm still going to be in a turkey coma. All right, we're going to stop now. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. He's not getting Christmas cards from us this year.